With Destined Rivals coming out in about 5 days at the time of recording, I wanted to talk about one of the more controversial cards that was announced, being the Rockets Mewtwo SIR, and the mixed feelings that it's gotten with fans that were really hyped up with the set and everything. A lot of people didn't think that it built up to the hype, or that it just doesn't look right, like it looks bad. And I just wanted to break down thoughts and feelings about this and put it into a digestible kind of deep dive into why Rockets Mewtwo looks the way it does. So the original critique that I saw with this card was that it didn't live up to its predecessors, being like Rockets Mewtwo from Gym Challenge, and it didn't give off the same kind of aura and mystique that other Mewtwo cards had, like the Shining Legends Mewtwo. That one, still kind of related to Team Rocket, and it's more modern, so that one just looks better, it feels better than something that came out now. So I don't think Mewtwo himself is the problem with the card. I think that a lot of people will, it's a Mewtwo card, so you look at Mewtwo and it looks awkward, like it's a boring A pose, and like, well, this looks weird. But I think the Mewtwo could work. I think it's the outside factors that don't bring the card together in the way that I think it could work. So starting with the composition, like I said earlier, I don't think Mewtwo is the problem. I think that the perspective of Mewtwo, where he's looking down at the camera and his pose is almost like a, fighting kind of pose. He's a psychic type. I think the pose works for Mewtwo. I think it gives off his personality, I would say. So I think the pose for Mewtwo is fine, but I think what throws off his vibe is that when you're looking at Mewtwo, he's looking down at you, and so it's a perspective, you're looking up at Mewtwo. But when you look at Giovanni, he's just standing in front of you. So the perspective is thrown off with Giovanni just standing idly right next to him. I don't think that's a terrible play by itself, but when you look at the other cards from specifically Glory of Team Rocket, the Japanese counterpart, with the Rockets Moltres and the Rockets Nidoking, you can see that the Pokemon and the trainer are in harmony with the perspective, like they're in a scene together. I believe it's Archer, and Moltres standing side by side, and we got Nidoking, we got Giovanni in the back, Nidoking in the front. So the perspective is not warped due to the trainer being there. So I think when that's only happening from Mewtwo, it feels a little weird and it looks off compared to the other SIRs in the set. So another reason why the Giovanni just feels kind of awkward is that when you look at Giovanni, he ends up being the focal point because he's in the foreground. Mewtwo is in the middle ground. So you end up looking at Giovanni first, which doesn't have to be terrible. And in fact, Giovanni, the way Giovanni is positioned, he's positioned like this. So his body is facing Mewtwo. So it would, in most cases, lead your eye into Mewtwo. So then you would look at Giovanni, Mewtwo second, and then from there you would look towards the background. But the thing that wasn't really accounted for was that Giovanni is not looking at Mewtwo or the camera. He's looking off into the left. And so when you look at Giovanni, you're inclined to look at his face because you want to make eye contact with him. So you look at his eye, and then you follow his eye, and it leads you off the card. So then you have to redirect your eye to look at Mewtwo, and that makes it feel clunky. It doesn't fit, because you have to re-look at the piece. So Giovanni's color scheme matches the buildings in the background, which is not terrible. I think the darker color scheme would help shine light on Mewtwo and make him the focal point, since Mewtwo is very pastel, purple, pink, so he does stick out against a darker, like black, gray, brown color scheme. But the problem is that when you're looking at the card and you see Giovanni, he has odd green highlights on his side that Mewtwo does not have. So green ends up being the eye catcher color. So you're looking at the green, and that leads you further into Giovanni's face and further off the card. So the background is a reddish pinkish color, which puts the darker colors within the piece feel a little bit more strong. So when you're looking at it, just the left side of the card in general has more weight than, the top right or the middle, because it's just a very dark color scheme, and that includes Giovanni and the buildings in the background. So you end up just staring Giovanni down again, just because his color contrasts the middle of the card so much. And while I don't think the red background is a bad idea for Mewtwo, because it does give off more of a menacing look, it makes Mewtwo feel a little bit muddy, because the only part of red that is in the piece is right over, like just right over Mewtwo, which just makes his pink and purples just mesh together in a way that just does not look appealing. It just makes Mewtwo blend in with the background more, rather than what you would want, which is Mewtwo standing out in the front so he contrasts Giovanni and you're looking at the Pokemon in the Pokemon card. And the last thing about the color that I will talk about is that Mewtwo has a blue aura around him. It is very hard to see. This blue that kind of surrounds Mewtwo is not popping enough to fight the green that is on Giovanni. So while this card is very flawed with its composition and its color choice, I don't think that very many changes need to be made to make it more successful. Just very minimal changes could make it way more appealing. I think just alone shifting Giovanni's eye a little bit more, either he's looking at Mewtwo or he's looking down, mimicking Mewtwo's eyes, it would help kind of redirect your eye so you can look way more into the piece. So with me, I have my iPad, and I'm going to sketch out a composition that I think would be more successful than the pre-existing, and then we'll compare side by side, see how I do. Alright, I am back with the sketch completed. It is just a sketch, okay, so I didn't go in and shade it and, you know, completely tweak things up, so it is rough. It's a rough sketch. But here you go, here's evidence, here it is, this is mine. So what I started with was repositioning Giovanni a little bit, just so he doesn't feel so overpowering. I moved his eyes, I moved his whole face a little bit, so when you're looking at it, it doesn't feel as awkward. So he's mimicking Mewtwo, looking a little bit down, and that way when you're looking at him and you make eye contact, it's not necessarily the eyes that are bringing you away from the piece, his whole body is bringing you that way. I changed the background a little bit, I made it more of a deep red, that way Mewtwo's pastel colors stuck out a little bit more, so he looks a little bit better, it feels like him and Mewtwo are a little bit more connected, rather than Mewtwo is there and Giovanni is just kind of shoved in the corner. So those were the few changes that I made. I think the overall piece is not a bad idea, it was just made a little bit weird. So closing out, I do think that this card does look very clunky. I feel like there's really no other way to look at it. It feels a little weird, but I do think a big part in why it had a hate train in its first couple weeks of being out in the world was a huge hype train. Everyone wanted it to be just like Gym Challenge Rocket Mewtwo, just like all the other Mewtwo's that we've had. That's my opinion. Hope you enjoyed.